How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer, and we got Brian Alvarez here as well. And we're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling here on Wrestling Observer Live. Mick Foley will be joining us in about a half an hour, and we can talk about his book, Cheatham Brown, talk about the WWE when he's going to be back on television, how his tour was. He just got back from the UK, as a matter of fact. And actually, I'm almost done with his book, and got a lot of questions for him on that. But mainly, it's going to be you guys calling, because the last time he was on, we had so many questions that we took up almost the whole show. So this time, it's going to be you guys calling up for Mick Foley. You can call us at 1-800-878-PLAY, but all lines are busy right now. Brian, how are you doing?
I'm here.
What does that mean?
I in the introduction, so I almost didn't make it.
Wow. So how's your week?
So got us lost.
So now where are you at tonight?
I'm at the Elks Lodge again.
Milwaukee, Oregon?
Monthly, the monthly show here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Oh.
We made it.
Oh, that's good. Hulk Hogan's no longer in the WWE, at least for a little while.
Yep.
What was your reaction when you heard that news?
My reaction was, I remember when they first started doing the Mr. America thing, I liked it so much because it was so campy, and I really enjoyed a lot of what they did with it. And then, he was gone, and it's all over, and they did an angle to wrap it up on Thursday night on SmackDown, and it was like, okay.
Boy, that was a weak finish, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, all that build, and that was the end. He unmasked.
Yeah.
He got fired.
Yeah.
But what can you do, you know?
Yeah, and Roddy Piper, also gone?
Yep.
Yeah, in the same week. I think that's the best for all concerned anyway. And Hogan's going to end up being back, and I think everyone knows that anyway.
Yeah, and I think we talked a lot last week about Piper and how I'm sure he knew he was done, and probably Hogan had a pretty good idea as well from some of his interviews leading up to that announcement. So,
you know, Hogan, the one thing about Hogan that has come across as far as internally in the company, as far as with a couple of the wrestlers and everything, and not just wrestlers, but people in the office, it really hurt this leaving hurt his rep in the sense that he, left over among, the prime thing, the complaint about the payoff. And it's like every wrestler in that company knows that he got paid a whole lot more than they did, with maybe like the exception of Vince McMahon and maybe Kurt Angle, you know what I mean? Yeah. And he's out there, it kind of, he's booked for all these things, and he's agreed to stay at least through SummerSlam. And he doesn't like a payoff on a show that everyone knows, did well below expectations, and he decides to leave. And he was the main event. He was the guy who, was the guy who would have been credited had that show done well, and who would have gotten the blame had the show done poorly, and decided, I guess, that he thought the blame was unfair and the payoff was unfair.
So maybe Hogan knew something about vengeance, or had some predictions.
I guess so. As official as it's going to be this far in advance, it looks like we're going to get Triple H and Bill Goldberg as the main event at SummerSlam in Phoenix, Arizona, and I believe it's August 24th, although that date might be wrong, but it's actually, the date isn't wrong. That is the date. Okay. So anyway, that's going to be a very interesting match because it's a match that neither guy, there are great arguments on why both guys should win and why both guys should lose. And
in how long?
Boy, that's good. I just think that the week before and the day of that show and the day after that show are going to be very interesting.
Oh, I think that between now and August it's going to be very interesting because, whether or not, let's just say the main event is for sure.
And it's not for sure this time out, this far out, because Vince McMahon changes his direction on a dime regularly.
But assuming that he made mention of it tomorrow, that would leave 2 months for every game in the world to be played.
Well, it's going to be played whether he announces it or not because people are aware of it now. Yeah.
So that'll be fun to watch on TV because, whether they announce the match or not, the one thing that, like you said, will not be certain until the day of the show is who's going over. So
no, even if we hear a week before, it will not be certain until
nothing.
It will mean nothing. That's right, because there's going to be games played until the very end. Randy Couture and Tito Ortiz have a unification match for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship that's going to be on September 26th in Las Vegas. They had a press conference this week on Wednesday, and at the press conference, they in fact did not announce a building or when tickets would be on sale, but they did announce the match, and I guess they just wanted that out as quick as they could because it was, I guess, the day after.
There's many buildings bidding for it.
Maybe there are. I don't know. That is a really intriguing match, and it's a really hard one to pick. Not like every UFC match isn't hard to pick, but boy, this one's really hard to pick.
You know, the thing is, I always don't pick Randy, and Randy always amazes me.
Randy always wins when he's the underdog. Now he's the underdog again in this one.
I'm thinking about this match, and I'm just right now my pick would be Tito.
You know, if they were both 28 years old, my pick is Randy for sure. Randy's 40. Then again, he hasn't looked 40 in a lot of his fights.
No, he has not.
And he certainly didn't in his last fight. That is a really tough one to pick. You know, Tito's been doing a movie, so, I mean, is as much training as he can probably do. You know, Randy's probably trained harder, although the training in the last 6 weeks is really what counts, and Tito will train incredibly hard. You know, Tito's younger. Randy's got more guts. And in a tough fight, the guy with more guts, has the edge in that Tito doesn't like to, nobody likes to get hit, but Tito folds quicker. Now, Tito is younger, and Tito is a really skilled fighter.
Yeah.
And it's a tough one. And go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you know, and the size, the whole thing is that Ortiz has been used to being kind of, I guess, the strong guy in every match he's been in. He's been he's never faced a wrestler of the caliber of Randy Couture. You know, he's faced kickboxers and punchers much better, but in every case he's managed to take them off their feet and keep them there, which meant that their kickboxing meant nothing. With Randy Couture, there's a question on who's going to get the takedowns, and they're going to have to fight for them, whoever's going to get them. Standing up, Tito, I think, is quicker, but Tito doesn't like to get hit, and, you know, Randy outboxed Chuck Liddell, who Tito was afraid of. So, it's, again, we'll have a lot to say about that one as the weeks go on.
Yeah. The one thing when I listened to the press conference was I was listening to Tito, and everybody who asked him a question was asking about ducking Chuck Liddell and everything like that, and we've obviously been following that for months and months now, and I think pretty much everybody assumed that he was, but Tito did such a good job that I almost believed his entire story.
Except that it wasn't true.
And then he had these commitments, and then he couldn't train because he was filming for this movie, and he was so good that I was like, wow, he's making a strong case.
Yeah, but you know what really killed it was when, I think it was Jeff Merrick, actually, who asked about the comment about maybe we're going to take that match to Japan. And then they were trying to say, oh, well, they meant that, you know, UFC was going to do a show in Japan headlined by that. Yeah. When I heard that, it was just like, okay, you guys, you're insulting my intelligence, and you've gone too far.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that they knew that Jeff knew because they didn't sound like they wanted to talk to him.
I don't think they wanted to talk to anyone. That was kind of embarrassing as a press conference. I mean, as far as like, because all the questions, you know, for Tito were all about Chuck Liddell.
Yeah, it was almost like the Linda McMahon conference when that one guy called in and they immediately got rid of him. But it was like an entire call full of that.
Anyway.
They could avoid it.
Yes. What do you think of Zach Allen's debut on Thursday? His first match on Thursday, anyway. I mean, the first match that WWE fans would have seen.
When I first heard that it was going to be that particular match, I thought, this is the most horrible idea I've ever heard of in my whole life. But I think that the way that it ended on TV, I almost think that it was a success. So
I think it was a success, but on the wrong night. They should not have done that match on a night where you know that the audience is going to be low, because they spent all these months building up this guy's debut, and they do it on a night where, you know, it's probably one of the lowest, you know, and the final rating is not, but I would assume it's going to be one of the 5 lowest rated SmackDowns in history.
Yeah.
And it's not the fault of the main event, it's the fault of the night.
Yeah. And of all the of all the matches they could have booked him in, this was pretty much a miracle the way it turned out.
Yeah, it was put together real well. I love that one where Big Show, in all of his plumptitude, I don't think there's such a word, but
there is now.
Yes, so, you know, went up to Stephanie McMahon and made her look just so small and thin.
I thought that exact same thing.
I mean, he looked so huge and fat as he was doing that ogre thing on Stephanie McMahon, and she's doing that. You know, that was tremendous, though.
I could not help but think that she had to have written that whole segment right there. where I'll be in a hall and Big Show will obscure the entire hall. Because everyone's always talked about, God, Stephanie looks so big. And all of a sudden they do this angle and she looks like just tiny woman.
Yes.
The magic of the Big Show.
Oh, my God. And
so she actually knows the lesson of size and no one else in the company does.
Obviously Vince Russo didn't on Wednesday.
That's true.
Yeah. Kane, bald head, no more burns.
I take back everything I wrote about how this could possibly be a success. He was so less terrifying with the shaved head, and yeah, he's doomed.
Yeah, the other thing on the WWE, remember a couple weeks ago we were praising them about how the like the week that they had the 2 Madison Square Garden shows, how they had the lineups in advance, and everything was so well built up. And now here we are in Montreal and Toronto this week for Raw and SmackDown, and we don't know anything.
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing's been said whatsoever. Although Eric Bischoff will not be there tomorrow, and Steve Austin will be back tomorrow, and I guess it's Steve Austin's revenge. That's like I hate those kind of things where they do that one week and then the other one the other week. They used to do that in the past. I never liked it. I didn't particularly like Raw. I thought SmackDown ended up being all right, kind of slow at the beginning. The tag team title change where Shelton Benjamin and Charlie Haas beat Eddie Guerrero and Tajiri. That was a really good match.
Yeah.
And the final segment, for what it was, I thought it was a successful segment. The place went crazy, so the show ended on a good note. The last half hour, 45 minutes were all right. It was kind of boring up until that point.
There's something about the angle where Eddie was upset because of his car that I just loved.
Oh, yeah.
He's looking so sad and Tajiri's lying on this broken windshield.
And then he goes and looks at
him off.
Yeah.
My car. That was great.
Yeah. So, I guess that means we're going to get some Eddie Guerrero and Tajiri matches.
Yep.
So, and I don't know where they go from there, but I guess we will find out.
Chava will be back.
Not that soon. Not till September.
Well, the rate they're going with one pay-per-view, you know what I mean?
Yeah. At the house shows, they were hooking Eddie with Sean O'Hare. So at least that's what I saw over the weekend, so we'll see where that goes.
The thing I don't understand, I always look at the house shows, and I just look at how I had to try to learn how to wrestle, and that was to be in the ring with someone who knew what they were doing. And I just look at these house show lineups, and it'll be like Maven will be in the ring with Mark Jindrak or something like that, or they'll take someone and they'll team him with somebody who's experienced. And I would think, okay, why don't you have them wrestle with the person who's experienced? It should be Eddie Guerrero versus Sean O'Hare every single night for 6 months. And then Sean O'Hare will be good. Not Sean O'Hare teaming with Eddie and facing Mark Jindrak and Maven or whoever.
Well, I don't know that we'll do that, especially because they're on different rosters. But I do know what you're saying.
You just got to work against good guys. And I always see these tough enough guys wrestling tough enough guys, and I don't understand it.
Yeah. My figure 4 story of the week is last week you were talking to me about feeling bad about when I read it, and of course I told you that it's no big deal, things like that never happen. And so guess what happened yesterday when the mail came, and everybody's in a bad mood at the house, and I come back from the post office, and I got my figure 4, and I sit down, and everyone's yelling and screaming, and I just tune it out, and I start reading about your article about Jamal being fired, which is a spoof of Jamal being fired. It's not like we're making fun of that 350-pound man being fired. But he wrote a really funny story about it, and I'm just cracking up, and people were not amused by the fact that I was having a good time when nobody else was having a good time. And
oops.
So.
Maybe I should send 5.
What?
Maybe I should send 5 issues, one for everybody.
She probably should. What, for the dogs, too?
Yeah.
Not that many people living in the house. All right.
I did get a couple of orders the other day, and I noticed that they were from 3 people in the same home.
All ordering? I never get anybody like that.
I was very amazed by that one, so.
I would be, too.
Whatever works for you.
Yes. Anyway, we are going to go to Mike in Kelowna, British Columbia, which I think is going to have a SmackDown taping next month, correct?
Yeah, we sure are. First one ever.
Yeah. Now, it was Nitro or Thunder that was there?
We had a Nitro just a few months before the whole thing went down.
Yes.
We've had a house show once since then.
Yeah.
And that's it. But the house show was very well attended, and I was talking to one of the agents, and he said that they were going to look at us more because it was really well attended. We had a hot crowd, so we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. I guess in Kelowna that's going to be pretty huge, huh?
Yeah, the ticket sales went went huge. There's less than 100 seats left, and the building holds about 6,000 people. So it's a big deal for us. It made front page of the sports section. We're pretty stoked about that. I guess the decline in business is good for smaller centers like us. So,
but you know what's funny is on that is, I mean, and Kelowna obviously being the exception, is that, you know, if you look at the schedule that these guys are running, they're running a lot of small towns, and I was thinking, well, you know, this is probably the time to do small towns, but they don't draw at all in small towns. And you know, you would think that it's like something special, like if you come to a New York where, or no, not New York's probably not a good example either, but let's say San Francisco where there's a million different entertainment things. Not that New York doesn't have them all as well. That a cold product wouldn't be a big deal, but you know, they've been running in a lot of these, you know, B and C cities and doing, you know, 2,000 people as well, and especially like last week in markets where, you know, like Syracuse and stuff, where I just thought they would always be, you know, doing well in. So
maybe they need to move to cold cities, like physically cold.
Well, Canada? Well, Canada always.
Drop.
Yeah, Canada always holds up better in declines than the United States does. Like from 92 to 96, I just remember that when they would go to Canada, they would not do nearly as poorly as they would do in the United States. And I think that to a degree that's the case, although they were in, you know, they were the SmackDown crew, I think, was in Canada this weekend. And, well, at least last night, I don't think they did all that well.
London didn't do that nearly as well as it did the last time they were there.
Right, that's right. So it's the Raw crew, and they were. That's right. London was way down. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at any rate, we're very excited to have them here. It's gonna be good times. I'm going to Raw the one night and then SmackDown the next night. It's gonna be awesome.
Cool.
The question I have for you, I was at first off, love the Wrestling Observer. It's awesome. I'm a subscriber. Love it very much.
Thank you very much.
In the last. It was last week. You talked about the properties of what WWE owns. You talked about the movie properties. You said there was nothing really there except for producer credits for Rock movies and a Stone Cold Steve Austin credit of some sort for a direct-to-video movie or something like that. When we were at WrestleMania, we were right up front, and they had a bunch of film cameras there.
Yeah.
And we just got the DVD this week. It just came out here in Canada this week. And Lawler is going off about this WrestleMania the movie thing that they're making.
Right, they did it during the show.
Yeah, do you know anything about that? Is it still a go? Would that be a movie property?
It's done. I'll actually know a lot more about it in a couple of days, but from what I gather, nobody wants it.
Working on that?
What?
Wasn't Sahadi working on that?
He was one of the people working on it. From what I gather, there was not a big market for it in that. I think UPN and TNN may have both turned it down, but I'm not positive about that. I know one of them did for sure, and I'll let you know like which one it was, or if both did. But right now there's they have a ton of footage and they have no place to air it, and some of the footage apparently is really good stuff because they did an interview with Steve Austin, which was very emotional because it was him before his last match of his career. When right before he was actually, taken to the hospital, the day before the show is when they did the interview. And it kind of all leads one into the other.
Is it more of like a Beyond the Mat type thing?
No. Well, it's not going to be like a Beyond the Mat because they're doing it themselves.
So it's sugar-coated, it's WWE, basically.
I don't know if sugar-coated is the word because I haven't seen it. They want it to be a good documentary. They don't want it to be a fluff piece. But, it's not going to be like Beyond the Mat and, they're in full control and they're going to make WrestleMania seem like a great thing, and they're certainly, when all is said and done, I'm sure that the end of the movie isn't going to be like, by the way, this show, did a hugely disappointing buy rate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think that'll make the movie.
No, that makes some sense. But at any rate, the whole weekend was great. It'd be great to have something like that. Just curious about it.
I'm sure if nothing else, they'll release on video. They filmed so much stuff.
I would hope so.
Yeah, I guess.
One final thing before Foley goes on there.
Yes.
We just did our travel packages for WrestleMania in New York. If you could just ask Foley if there's been any talk about him coming on there, that would be fantastic.
Coming on where?
Any plans for him to show up for Mania in New York?
I think that there's. Well, we'll ask him right now, right this very second, and I think there's probably a pretty decent shot at that.
Hey, cool.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you very much.
All right, we've got Mick on the line as well. Mick, how are you?
Dave, I'm doing good. You rescued me from fixing a broken toilet. I was starting to get aggravated, so the phone call came just in time.
All right, perfect timing. I guess we should start with the question that we just had, which is, what's your thoughts about being at WrestleMania and doing WrestleMania this year?
Yeah, I would love to be part of it in some respect. I don't know what it would be. I mean, at the very least, I guess could be like their Access weekend, and probably at the very most, I could maybe be in a match. But I don't know. It's a long ways away. What is it? 6 months away?
Yeah,
yeah, a little more than that. But I would like to be a part of it in some way. I had spoken, about possibly doing a match at Mania, and then, of course, over the last several weeks, it looks, like there's a chance to do something before that, but I haven't made up my mind about anything from a wrestling perspective.
But now I've read, in the multitude of interviews that you've done over the last week, all over the world.
Yeah, I've done a bunch of them.
That you're not going to wrestle at SummerSlam.
I don't think so. Nobody has formally even asked me to think about it. And the truth is, I mean, I was looking at my schedule today. This is kind of a brutal book tour. I don't think anybody's ever done something this ambitious as far as book signing. It's 25 cities. I started a week ago in England, and it goes through the 21st of August. And other days, when I'm not signing, I'll be doing things promotionally, and I just don't think I could get in any kind of shape. And nobody has presented me with the opportunity of doing a match. Also, I don't know if apparently I'm not as tough as I used to be, because I'm really still hurting from the flight down the stairs, and I thought it was just a knot in my back, and it may be something more substantial. So I don't even know if I'd be ready. Not even as far as from a cardiovascular standpoint, but from a health standpoint either.
I don't think we asked you last time, but how are you feeling in general before you fell down the stairs?
Oh, well, I was. You should say, how was I feeling before I got involved in Miami? I was feeling, I thought, pretty good. I mean, I had some soreness that would be expected after having a pretty tough career. But all in all, I'd spoken to the guys backstage, because they wanted to know like what it feels like to rest up a little bit, and I told them it was especially tough to come back in Miami and wake up the next day with the knee swollen and everything aching again, because I had gotten used to feeling lousy when I was wrestling, so that lousy became normal. And then, after a year and a half, when everything starts to ease up a little bit, feeling lousy again is a big adjustment.
So this is your fifth book?
Yeah, this is the fifth one, and definitely don't want to have anyone confuse this with a children's book.
Not at all. The one thing, and again, I'm right at the point in the book, about page 201, where Andy, who was the guy who the 17-year-old, I guess, roughly, right? Is that the age that he's
17?
17-year-old, who the book is basically about his life up to this point, has been reunited with his father, and he's just found out that his father was a professional wrestler in the South in the 60s and in other places as well. You used some of your wrestling knowledge and background to kind of make the father character.
Right.
One of the things that last night when I was reading this thing that really just popped into my head was when you did the Mankind character.
Right.
For some reason I visualized that you, in doing the Mankind character, kind of like the tragic, Mankind character, you kind of think that he was, growing up abused and all this, that it was this kind of, did you kind of have an idea of the Mankind character and then use that to formulate this book, or they just kind of, because I read the whole book and it wasn't really, I wasn't really thinking about Mankind at all until I guess the last couple of pages that I've been reading, it's just like all of a sudden, wow, this is maybe where you get some of that depth of the Mankind character.
Yeah, actually it wasn't, but that's an interesting take on it. I think that's part of what's really cool about books is that they're open to interpretation. And I was in England, I guess, for 4 days, and I had some really pretty astute literary people talking to me about the book, and they had come to conclusions that I had never even thought of. So it's not as if you would be wrong. It's just not something I had considered. But obviously that kind of and I want to make it clear for anyone who picks his book up, this has nothing to do with my relationship with my father. And I wish, in a way, that I dedicated the book to him and said to my dad, who is nothing like Tatum Brown. But I can't, I guess I'm drawn to that. The dark upbringing and some problems early in life. And you've just gotten to the part, I guess, where things start to get a little ugly, right?
I think they've been getting ugly for the whole book.
Yeah, it shocked me when people were. It was Barry Blaustein was one of my pre-readers, the director of Beyond the Mat, for guys listening who don't know. And I handed the book out to like 4 different people whose opinions I respected. And Barry was the first one to finish. He got back to me and he said, and he'd left a message. I think I was in England at the time doing Robot Wars. And the message was like this haunted message. And he said, I really, really love it, but it's so dark and I'm having trouble sleeping, to tell you the truth. And I thought Barry was crazy. I really thought I'd written an uplifting love story.
Well, I mean, there were aspects of it where you got there, but then the rug was always pulled.
Yeah, the kid...
well, you're not done reading yet.
That's true. I just read about the rug being pulled last night. I was getting really sad when the character had this, like, saintly girl who he's chasing after and actually was his girlfriend at one point, and then and then they have the breakup, and it's just so sad because it's like, I mean, the way you wrote the girl character was like every kid's high school crush combined into one. And he was, this poor, pathetic figure who, every poor, pathetic figure, like, it was interesting, again, reading the different characters, because, I don't know, I think that a lot of things are similar. I always relate real well to your books anyway, although they were wrestling books, maybe I should, but, like, a lot of the different characters, I could sort of relate to them, like, the history coach and everything, and the history teacher and football coach, which I want to talk to you about in a second.
Sure.
But I mean, I could see, like, when a kid growing up in high school, there's the one girl who you in your mind dream she's got all these saintly qualities, and you actually wrote a girl pretty close to that in the book.
Yeah, I think it was, this girl will win a lot of readers' hearts, and I wish you hadn't told about the breakup, even though there's more to it than that.
Yeah,
I think at some point, she'll break people's hearts, and. It's interesting when you talk about things getting ugly or being ugly from the beginning. I'm doing the Today Show. I'm lucky enough to be on a third time, and it'll be on Wednesday. Is Wednesday the 8th? Or no, Tuesday the 8th. And the producer called me because they do a little pre-interview, and she said, don't get me wrong, I really like it. She said, it's just I've never read anything quite like this. And I said, why is that? She said, it's just when I thought things had to get better, they got worse.
Well, every time I think that this is the big turnaround, and then there's another thing thrown out there that you go, oh my God, another.
Yeah. You know what? The father character to me, and this is, I'd said a little bit. I guess I don't know how much has aired in the Torch Talk, but Wade Keller was asking me about, if it was anything like wrestling or if it was completely different, and I said, to tell you the truth, it's not that much different, and I think that being characters in wrestling, and especially I guess because of the way I looked, not quite fitting the norm of what promoters usually pushed, I think it gave me an added emphasis to create an added incentive to create characters that people could either like or dislike, but certainly believe in. And to me, it's not like I wrote it saying, okay, the dad's going to be a mid-card heel, but essentially he was like a mid-card heel who really teased a big babyface turn and ended up, becoming a killer heel. And I remember, working with Sting like as far back as '92, and he said, geez, the character's a little too sympathetic, and I gave him my big analogy about how the teacher, if a teacher has 2 kids, that are bad, but that one kid has the potential to be good, and she gives him extra time and attention, and that kid turns around and becomes the heel on her, it will mean a lot more, and the pain will be a lot more acute than if it was the bad kid all along. So I've always been interested in those characters that walk a fine line, and I think this dad does it pretty well.
Now, were you always a history buff? Because that sort of shows up in certain parts of the book.
Yeah, not always. I mean, my mom found this book when I was 7, where she would mark off books as I read them, and it was like, man, I was doing a lot of reading, and a lot of it was centered around history. And even, I 4th, 5th grade, I remember, being a big World War II buff. And that was something I fell out of. And about 7 years ago, I got back into studying the Civil War. And the Civil War really brought me into civil rights, in the 50s and the 60s, which this book touches on. And then, the civil rights ended up working itself into the Cold War, and the whole studying about Brent Bozell brought me into that era, of McCarthyism and into modern day politics. But I thought it was pretty interesting history. I mean, I guess you're getting into that right now, where I talk about the the early '60s and the fact that they had Negro matches and balconies, the colored section. And
the Sputnik Monroe type of stuff.
Yeah, and that's why at the end of the book I acknowledge Sputnik Monroe, because I think we were just talking about this the last time that when the time was up. I had no idea that someone had done the things that Tatum Brown was doing in this book, so I thought it was only right to acknowledge that somebody else had kind of broken that ground.
Now, the football coach,
right?
And I don't want you to. I actually have some questions for you about the football coach, but it'll spoil the book, so I'm going to ask you some other time.
Okay.
But one thing, I don't know if did every school have a coach like that? Because
I haven't read the book, but I can say yes.
Because because I'm reading about this coach,
right?
And it's like, there are aspects of him. We didn't at our school have a coach exactly like him, but we had a coach very similar. But at a rival school, there was a coach who was exactly like him, who ended up, in fact, being arrested, almost on identical things. And when I'm reading this, I'm just going like, I heard about this. I even kind of lived through this, but I mean, I think that they were prevalent everywhere, but I didn't know it till 20 years later.
Yeah, I don't know if they were quite as bad as this guy. Quite as
well, no, not quite as bad, but similar.
But that was one of the things my mom asked me about, and I have to assume my mother, who the book is dedicated to, didn't like the book. I think she may have found it a little shocking, especially coming from her son.
I can see that.
Yeah, and I never even figured that, because like I said, at that point, I still, up until this past month, I still was under the impression that this was a sensitive coming of age story, which in a way it is, but it never really hit me that stuff that that people would find it that bad. Maybe my 16 or 17 years in the wrestling world has altered my perception of what is and isn't normal. But my mom was asking me about the coach, almost like there's no one like that, is there? And I said, well, I don't know of one, but I said I think that, coaches who are winners and athletes who are winners certainly are allowed to play by a different set of rules. And since that, I've heard a lot of talk about the coach. And to tell you the truth, I thought he was kind of a one-dimensional lunkhead, but people really like him. And to tell the truth, when I rewrote the book, I was actually going to make him look a lot more like me, so that if it ever came into a movie, that I could be the coach.
But then you'd have to gas up.
I know. Well, that if I rewrote it, I wouldn't. I was going to say something about a prominent set of love handles and arms, and I could have. I still think I could play him if I could shape up to play the coach. I wouldn't be quite as big as I described him, but I think I could. Get into that character pretty well.
I want to go to the phone calls. We're going to start with Alan in Deerfield Beach, Florida. Alan, what's happening?
Hi, Dave. How's it going?
Going good.
Great. I wanted to ask Mick, actually you stole my question about him coming back, but I'll ask him in terms about WCW. What does he think was the downfall of the company? And also ask him about some road stories about him and Max Payne, if he could elaborate.
Right. Which three initials did you give me? WCW?
Yes.
Oh man. Well, Dave, I think
you have an hour, right?
Rationalize that. I think they just. I think they insulted their audience a little bit after running that NWO angle way past its course. And then I think internal politics really got the best of them. And obviously that's just a fraction of what went wrong, but you had really good wrestlers who no longer wanted to be there, and who who it was proven could not move up the line no matter how good they were. So I think you just had a lot of people losing interest, and you had the top guys all just trying to maintain their spots so they could keep on getting paid.
Before I ask the next question, I want to ask you about Max Payne, who our last caller asked about. What are your thoughts about, I know that you guys tag teamed a lot in the WCW days.
Yeah, I probably consider him a better friend than a great, partner. Not that he wasn't a good partner, but we never really got the chance to get off the ground, I think. I thought it was an interesting team, and I thought we had the potential to do some really good promos, but I think we were kind of stuck in the first or second match on a pay-per-view or two, and then Max had that infamous suplexing of Brian Knobbs where he nearly killed him, and I don't know if we teamed up after that. Instead, it was Sullivan, and that was kind of the end of my run. It just kind of segued from me and Max to me and Kevin, but I considered him a really good friend, and I really enjoyed traveling with him. And he was they used to call him MacGyver, because it didn't matter what somebody needed, like if you had a flare, like for your car, he'd have it, or he'd have special utensils that could fix about anything. And he was the type of guy that would, if he saw something and he wanted it, he'd buy it without, pausing to think about what it might be.
Like a recording studio.
Yeah, exactly. Like a recording studio. And I guess he's producing some albums, and I don't know what he's doing, but I imagine, he's going to find something to do well. He was a talented guy.
Yeah.
You haven't talked to him lately?
No, and it's been a couple of years since I talked to him, and I think I just spoke to William Regal, who said he was going to give him a buzz when they went into Salt Lake City.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of kept his distance from the wrestling business, I think.
Yeah, he did our show a couple of times. He was actually a tremendous guest, and very much into the recording business now. And videos. He has his wrestling video that I don't think will ever get released, but it's quite controversial to say the least.
Oh, the stuff he filmed in Europe?
Yeah.
He was telling me about that. Yeah, I don't know if it'll ever get released either.
But
Dave, before we take a call, I just want to clear up the Keebler test rumor that's been floating around.
Yes.
I read the Observer, and it made it seem like I was without any questions asked, I was like the Cupid in that relationship. And the truth is, I think it's a lot more vague than that. Stacy told me that, and I knew she was reading the book when I met her, when I came in July, about the time of, the July pay-per-view a couple of years ago. And what was the name of that? Rebellion or something like that?
Rebellion would have been a UK pay-per-view.
No, not Rebellion. The one where ECW and WCW.
Oh, Invasion.
Invasion, okay. And so I found that pretty flattering to start with. And then, I hadn't seen her or talked to her in the interim period, but as soon as she was the first person I saw when I walked back through the doors, which was actually the hardest part about returning, was actually opening up those double doors backstage. And once I got back there, it was, it was really a lot of fun. And she was the first person I saw, which made things a lot easier. And then there was Tess scowling behind her, so it wasn't that great after all. But she told me that she thinks, and she was kind of joking around, she said she thinks that all the ribbing I did on Test made her feel sorry for him, so that she was predisposed to liking him, which is a long way from saying I'm the guy that got them together. But certainly I think there could be some substance to you saying that all the guys in the dressing room are wishing I'd made fun of them in the book. But still, even with that being said, I don't think Al Snow had a shot at Stacy.
Now, you were mentioning to me in the break about now I want to ask you, as far as the reviews and everything of the book, you said like a lot of the critics in the UK did well. Now, did you notice a difference as far as perhaps treatment as far as the UK critics and American critics?
I do.
Especially when it comes to the ex-wrestler aspect of you.
Definitely. I think the people in the UK are much more open to the idea that an ex-wrestler could write a book that might be good. Whereas over here, it's almost like you're starting, with, in a hole, and you have to dig yourself out of it. And so whereas, and I still, my publicist over there said that she was meeting some resistance in the UK, and then the most respected literary critic out there, at least the most respected critic on radio, was a very prestigious show on the BBC, on their arts and entertainment station, loved the book. And that kind of gave it a stamp of approval. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Then everyone can follow, yeah.
Yeah, and everyone kind of followed suit to where, the publisher, who was a very prestigious person over there, was calling it, the best debut novel she's seen in 5 years. And what was kind of neat about that is she actually left the party with Bill and Hillary Clinton to come to my dinner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I thought that was kind of neat. So my name actually came up at the Hillary, when she told Bill she was leaving, and she had to go to dinner with Mick Foley. So I thought that was pretty cool. Over here, I do get the sense that the people are. It's almost like it reminds me of Brent Bozell. At least a couple of reviews I've read, where Brent Bozell used to watch our show, but he wasn't watching it to see what might be good about it. He's like over there cherry picking the bad parts, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And even with that being said, I haven't gotten a lousy review. What I've gotten is almost like a grudging, review where they say things like, and while one can't help but admire such strange images as, where they say, and while the two main characters are undeniably interesting, and they'll pick on the fact that they'll say, oh, but the peripheral characters are two-dimensional, and I'm thinking, how many books have, more than a couple of characters that are really well-defined anyway, and I disagree with that. But overall, even the one that got on me the worst concluded by saying, fans in the mood for vigorous pulp may enjoy it. So, it's kind of like a real half-hearted endorsement, but it's still an endorsement nonetheless.
Do you find it also as far as, like, getting on the big shows and things like that? Because I know when you did your first books, and nobody had any idea that those would do as well, or the very first one, as well as it did.
Right.
I got the impression that, a lot of shows, and we talked about it, there were certain shows that would not put you on, perhaps because you were a wrestler or for whatever reason.
Yeah, there's still, unfortunately, a stigma that surrounds wrestling, unless you're like The Rock, who, has clearly broken through into the mainstream. But I'd say, even Austin met a lot of resistance, even though he was, like a cultural icon, back in 98, 99. I mean, Triple H has a real tough time getting any kind of mainstream publicity, and, he's been the heavyweight champion several times. But the second book, we were meeting a lot of resistance, and when the New York Times article came out, it was like the floodgates opened up. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, just as in the UK they needed, a stamp of approval from that one literary critic, that the New York Times was like a big stamp of approval, letting other mainstream shows know, okay, it's okay to have this guy on. So, at the same time that, I've taken a couple of beatings, and not even real major beatings from some of the real highbrow critics, which is a little different than a major newspaper who would, I think, be a lot more lenient on my past. But at the same time, I've taken a couple lumps. There's thousands of books that are published every year, and 99% of them don't get, near the attention that this one does. So, it's a little bit of give and take, and I think I actually come out ahead on the deal because, like I said, I've got the Today Show in a couple of days, and an article in USA Today and Entertainment Weekly. So just those three, even if nothing else comes up, would be a lot more than most books get.
Did you at any point, either whether it would be with your publishers or even yourself, go like, this is a risk. You have a great track record, and now you're going into uncharted waters because your wrestling book sold primarily among wrestling fans, even though I thought that, your books, I think that your books to a degree probably sold to a little bit among people who weren't wrestling fans just because it kind of became a hot book. But with this one, it's like, yeah, you're going to have some wrestling fans. You're going to have wrestling fans buy it. That might even be your core audience. But for it to be, a success, you're going to have to make it to an audience that isn't even, that might know who you are, but that they're not enamored with you in the same way as I would think. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a risk. Even the idea of writing it was was risky, let alone trying to sell it to the public. And I actually had a good offer from Judith Regan that I didn't take just because I didn't know if I could actually write a book. Judith made me the offer back when I said I wanted to write one. So I actually wrote the book without any kind of guarantee whatsoever. Then we shopped it around, and it's funny because some people got it, and then there were others that were like, well, can't the father be a good guy? And it just kind of reminded me of wrestling in the sense that, sometimes people think that, the popular way is the only way, and that somebody, with a little different style, or in my case, somebody with a little different look couldn't make it. So it is a risk, and there is a chance, because it is. I was mentioning that one reviewer gave me a great review, and she said it was a strange mix of J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye and Bret Ellis Easton's American Psycho. So you might look at that and say, well, God, we're going to get everybody then. We're going to get people who like sensitive, thoughtful books. We're going to get people who like violent, sickening books. Or you might not get any of them because there might not be enough of either. So I don't know. It's a risk, and I am hoping that some wrestling fans buy it. Which is, if you don't mind me plugging this, just in case we don't get back to the book at all. On the MickFoley.com, I actually picked out several selections from the book and introduced them, gave them some introductions so people would know where I'm coming from. They kind of show the wide range of emotions, from the unique father-son relationship to the kind of sensitive relationship with the girl to the weird sex to the sickening violence. There's a nice flashback, Dave, that I think you'll like, dealing with this guy's wrestling days. And as well as that, besides that, I'm also going to be doing a tour diary, so if people want to keep up with what I'm doing on the road, they can log on to MickFoley.com.
Okay, great. We're going to go to Jeff in New York City. Jeff, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on? I'm going to speak to you, fellow Long Islander, Mick.
All right.
I have two questions for you, Mick. I've heard you on other radio shows when people ask you about Triple H, and you kind of, with all due respect, take the political route. You don't want to comment, obviously, due to his brass. But I'm curious if you'd be so kind to comment on how you feel about his reign so far, and do you think he should drop the title?
Yeah, you're right. That's a question I don't feel comfortable at all answering. Because, people can look at Triple H in a couple of ways. They can look at him, almost like Sandy Koufax in baseball, where, some people would say, well, Koufax didn't have the length of career to be one of the all-time greats, and others will say he had 4 of the best seasons of all time. He has to be considered one of the all-time greats. So by some standards, Triple H has drawn more money than any heel in the business, ever. I mean, by some standards. And then there are other standards that say, well, he has not had a program that has clicked with the public in the past year. And I would say there's some truth to both sides of the story. But I just think that title was a mistake from the beginning. I mean, they showed a flashback. I think it was on Confidential I was watching last night, which was a repeat. And they had Bischoff handing that title to Hunter. And it was like the wrong heat, It was like, just didn't sit right with me. And I think that they should have made the Brock Lesnar's WWE Championship mean more. So I don't know. You're right. It is it's a tough political question to field, especially because I made my best money with Hunter, and I have all the respect in the world for him as a performer. But he has had a couple programs that have not captured the minds of the fans this year.
No, I can see where you're going with that. My other question is about Tatum Brown. I'm wondering if I know you kept in mind it was written for a reader, not a pro wrestling reader. But in your opinion, do you think that pro wrestling fans who pick this book up, do you think they'll get more of what you're trying to say as opposed to someone who's not familiar with pro wrestling, and at the end of reading the book they'll come out with a different perspective?
I don't think they'll really come out with a different perspective. I think they may especially enjoy, the section of the book that explains, the wrestling background. And this was something I talked for several hours with Terry Funk, Harley Race, and Robert Fuller about. And I think that wrestling fans especially will find that era of the business to be fascinating. But I also think that non-wrestling fans would enjoy it, because I don't think they've ever looked at wrestling as thinking it has any historical significance whatsoever. At one point, it was a lot more wrestling heavy, and it's kind of a shame, for the sake of the wrestling fans, that about 20,000 extra words didn't make it, because for wrestling fans, it may have been fascinating, but at that point, it became a wrestling book, and it would have been kind of boring, I think, for non-fans. But who knows? Maybe we could work something out with the Observer where we might be able to print certain sections, because I think a lot of the listeners would find it really interesting.
Yeah. Tatum Brown will be available at all bookstores on Tuesday. It's his first novel. There is some wrestling. In fact, the part I'm reading right now has to do with wrestling, and it's kind of like 60s Southern Territories and some interesting stuff, actually. We talked about the civil rights movement being at that same time frame, and so I think some people will get kind of a kick out of some of those stories that were taken, I guess, from different wrestling stories where he had talked to other wrestlers. And Robert Fuller gets his name in the book, as I noticed.
Yeah, at one point, Terry Funk was in the book, and Danny Hodge was actually a significant character. Not that he had any speaking lines, but I remember talking to Harley Race a couple of years ago and asking him, about, bitter light heavyweights who, really resented the fact they never made that kind of money, the big guys would. And so Harley was really helpful. And, you see a lot of bitterness in the business, because everybody thinks to some extent that, they should have a better run than they do. And especially, I would think, guys, legitimate, shooters or hookers. And in this case, a guy who was trained in Wigan and, was about as good as they come. In the original story, the one guy that he couldn't take was Danny Hodge. And that's the one guy, that stood in the way of making any kind of money. And so he just resented it. He had a real hatred for football players and a real hatred for Texans based on meeting, dealing with Terry Funk and Amarillo. That didn't make the final cut. But like I said, I think it's pretty good storytelling. It just ultimately didn't, fit in. But, like I said, maybe we could make that available for, big wrestling fans down the road.
Yeah. Let's go to Ed in San Antonio. Ed, what's going on? Speaking of Texas.
Hey, Dave. Hey, Mick. I can't explain to you how big of a fan I am of yours. You've really inspired me.
Thank you.
And the question that I have for you is, I've heard many times that you said that you don't really have an interest in being a booker or being part of creative. I've always thought that you would be pretty good at it just from all the stuff that you've done in your career. And my question for you is, if you were given the job of head of creative, and who would you bring in to be your brain trust? Who do you think you would elevate to be part of the writing team and help change the direction? Because right now I think the weakest part of the WWE is the creative.
Oh, man, I wouldn't even venture a guess, because I wouldn't say I'm not interested at all in creative, but I wouldn't want the pressure of being the main guy, because in WWE you could never be the main guy anyway, because everything eventually filters through Vince. I would consider being a consultant, especially as I think I have a good feeling for characters, and I think I could work with some of the younger guys. But I don't know. I mean, I don't always have the right answers either. I've been wrong in my own career, and I've been wrong about talent. And I would hate to have other talents, futures in my hands. Because the truth is, if I was calling the shots, I would have gotten rocked. I would have gotten rid of the Rock during that whole Rocky Maivia phase. So it's I don't know. I wouldn't even entertain the prospect, because I don't feel like I'm qualified.
Well, if you're not qualified now, I'm getting scared, because I don't know too many people that would be more qualified.
I'd be qualified to be on the team. I just don't think I'd be qualified to. I've never done it. It's not like I grew up and booked territories and have any kind of a track record I could point to. I have a track record for creating characters, that were interesting and coming up with some really good ideas. But I used to have complete faith in guys like Eddie Gilbert. You know, even when I had complete faith in Vince Russo, although he was a guy that I think needed a lot of reining in, but I still thought he had a lot of talent. I see Brian Gewirtz, and I think he's kind of gets a hard deal with it. He's very talented. But I think in WWE, especially when you're trying to you're trying to draw from such a huge audience from every region of the country and different age demographics, you probably do need a team because one guy's vision probably isn't inclusive enough.
Now, the one thing when you bring up Brian Gewirtz, and this is not necessarily a knock on him, but on what a lot of people blame him for, that probably is not his fault, in that ultimately the way the shows are written is what Vince McMahon wants, and they're trying to do what Vince McMahon wants, and also to entertain the people. But there are times, and when I watch Raw, and it's the one emotion is it's the frustrating emotion, because one of the things that you and I have talked about before, there's a time for comedy,
right?
And then certain characters, to me, and I watched it on SmackDown Thursday with Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar, and I enjoyed the Brock Lesnar Kurt Angle byplay, but I thought it was wrong because I thought that it should have been, that stuff that Edge and Christian could be doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not, certainly not Brock Lesnar. I mean, Kurt's so versatile that he can do it, but I don't know if it's the wise thing for him. But whereas Brock, to me, Brock is an animal who should not be, slapping, drinking milk and cookies,
Yeah, I didn't happen to see it on Thursday, but we talked a little bit before about how that's a major problem, how that, the comedy, drama, athletic ratio is not always, in right proportion. Here's just an example, and it's not, and I don't want to point to this and say, wow, look what I did, but it's something, it's a minor thing, but it may have made a big difference, and I think if guys could somehow get this balance right, it may, on a larger level, change things. And I don't know what the hell that sentence just meant, but I'll give you the example. Is following the interview we did with Evolution, the one with me and Randy Orton, where Flair and Triple H were a part of it. We had a pre-tape done, and it was a funny pre-tape, and it was the type of thing where I ended up getting a good joke in on Al. I said I was going to be in Maven's corner, and Al asked if there's anything he could do, and I said, yeah, I'll probably be hungry. How about making me a couple sandwiches? And it was funny, but you know what? We came out of that interview, and when I was sweating, and I was all fired up, and the whole pre-tape wasn't right, so I kind of called an audible, and I said, can we do this live? It was like, and it was a lot of pressure, people running around, and boom, we did it, and it was not by any means the greatest pre-tape in the world, and probably the funny one was a lot better if you're judging it just on its own basis, but in fitting in with the context of the show, the first one was all wrong, and the second one was much, much better. And it's a hard thing to try to figure out what emotions are going to be like when the time comes. And maybe in that sense, Brian, because he has not been one of the workers, has not been in the business that long, he might not know or may not be able to guess that, whereas someone else would. But that's that. And obviously that'd be a tough call to do everything live because it's enough pressure as it is. But there are some times when you just cannot, you can't predict the future, and you shouldn't try to.
Anything else, Ed?
Let me ask you one more quick question before I go. You brought up Vince Russo.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I've seen a tape of Beyond the Mat, a special edition that has some extra footage, and one of the footages is the day you became Dude Love.
Right.
All the backstage stuff. And my question is how hard is it to have a professional relationship with somebody who every other word is a cuss word?
Was Vince cursing?
He was cursing like a madman throughout the whole...
You know what? You get so used to it. I think I even pointed out in Have a Nice Day that, like, hearing somebody like DDP go over ideas for a match, you don't shoot somebody into the ropes. You shoot them into the effing ropes. You don't give them an elbow. You give them a big effing elbow. That's just the way people talk. I stand out as being, there's like something wrong with me because I don't curse that often backstage. But Russo lets the F words fly quite a bit, I think.
It's a shame that part got cut because that was really entertaining. I really thought it should have made the movie.
The thing on that, when it comes to any of these, movies and pieces like that you see, there's so many hours of footage that they're editing down to 90 minutes, or in some cases with news stories, 15 minutes, and it's just a shame because I'm sure that those people who do it are crying, oh, man, this is so good. How can we take this out? But sooner or later, you got to get down to that length of time.
Yeah, that's what Barry Blaustein said. It was very difficult to get it down to the amount of time they wanted. And, there's so much there that you think could be used. And essentially, there could be whole other documentaries made out of that footage.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thanks for taking my call.
Okay, thanks very much. One thing that you mentioned and somebody else mentioned as far as like inspiring and everything, you definitely were the inspiration for a ton of people who probably looked at all the guys on wrestling and just go, I could never be like that. But now I can be like this.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
And the thing, it's good and it's bad. Because they saw one aspect of what you did to get over, and in many cases they did not understand everything that you had done. They just thought that it was the simplistic thing of, okay, if I don't have a good body, I can take a lot of pain, so therefore I'm going to build up my tolerance to pain. And again, like a lot of people that I see coming into wrestling, it's like they're looking at the moves, but they're not looking at the verbal ability and so many of these other things that, God, you just need.
Yeah, like you said, I don't know if it's a positive thing, because I think, if they looked a little closer, they'd see, that I really did have very good training. And, I sacrificed a lot, to be trained and gave up, my whole social life as a college student and subsisted on some pretty, some pretty sparse, into some pretty bad hotel rooms and on some pretty lousy food. But yeah, I do think some people think, well, he made it and he just, ruined his body. And that's one, way of looking at it. And in a way, I look around the dressing rooms. I did one independent show, and I didn't want to do it. I was literally telling the guy on the phone, I was going, if you didn't advertise me and it's a guaranteed show, why bring me in? And the guy was like, no, we want you in, and it just didn't make any sense, And I said, I'm going to feel bad taking these people's money. And I'll tell you what, Dave, after the show, I didn't feel so bad taking the money because they really these guys really hadn't taken the time to learn the business, and I'm not that hard on new talent, but I didn't see, anybody that had really studied and was trying to, really become a decent all-around performer. They were just running out, move after move, and the crowd, they can only take so many big moves before you have to give them some kind of a story out there.
Yeah. I go to Savannah, Georgia, and Jonathan. Jonathan, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Dave, I had a question for you and a question for Mick.
Okay.
My question for you, it'll probably be real quick, is where are they heading, if you know, with the Noble Nydia angle?
I don't know. I don't know.
And I guess that's it then. And my question for Mick was, if he had to pick like maybe top, like 5 guys from the indie scene, if he had his own, let's say he had his own like federation, or he could, like he was Vince and he could sign guys, or JR, or whoever does all that, who would he pick?
I have to be honest with you. I've got 4 kids, and I just don't have the time, or haven't made the time to check out the indie scene, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I keep up with it in the Observer, and I would like to see some of the guys I read about, but I just don't know the independent scene that well.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. All right, that was it. Thanks.
Okay, Jonathan. I want to ask you, in your career, okay, of guys that you've worked with, I just want to make it of guys that you've worked with, okay? Because you're in the ring with them, you know how their pluses and minuses. Who do you think are the most physically, I don't want to say physically even talented, but the guys that you just, like really respect their, whether it be physical ability, mental ability, all-around ability. You don't have to limit it to any, like, number, just guys that right off the top of your head just go, these guys are just total standouts of guys I've worked with.
Well, I was lucky, in that I had, so many great guys, especially, during the years I was with WWE, but even before that, to be in there with Bobby Eaton, and I really enjoyed working with Sting, and I thought, that program did a lot for me. And then, heading into WWF, without the program with The Undertaker, probably the whole Mankind character would have just, fallen by the wayside. So I really enjoyed him and the way that he looked, his outlook on the business and doing matches. And from there, I had some great runs, not just great runs, but great matches and a lot of fun also working with Austin, working with Triple H, working with The Rock when he was a young heel, even though, we had our share of differences, but I think we also had a great time and did a lot of funny things later when we went on to team up. So there's some of the guys, and of course, Terry Funk was probably my favorite all-time guy to work with. Although I don't know why he didn't show up at the Garden.
I was going to ask you about that. Like, what happened there?
I got in touch with him, and I'm afraid to find out why he wasn't there. I don't know if WWF didn't contact him, or if something fell through. I don't know. It would have been nice to have had him there.
Yeah. Let's go to Ben in Boca Raton. Ben, what's going on? Ben. That's not working. We're going to have to go to Jeff in Burlingame. Jeff.
Hey, Dave, good talking to you.
Okay, what's going on?
Hey, well, you just took my question about Terry Funk.
Okay.
About why he wasn't there?
Yeah, that's part of it. The other one was, Mick, I was at the ECW arena the night Terry Funk caught on fire.
Right.
And I want to know if you can tell us what it was like in the dressing room that night.
Oh, man. That was like the lowest point of my career, as far as my enthusiasm for the business. I really thought, I didn't realize it was the towel that had flown off the chair, that was taped on, was taped onto the chair and had flown off and landed on him. I thought, from my vantage point, that it was just a fireball that, just ignited him. And I remember, I think, there's about 3 seconds you have before a flame really does its damage. And I had written in my book, I said, I don't know if I couldn't catch him or if I just, kind of chickened out, because I remember thinking I need to put out Terry. And then I remember thinking, how? I don't know how to do it. And I don't know if I couldn't catch him or if everything just happened so quickly. But that towel ended up, dropping off of his body, and he was burned only in, one small part, but severely burned in that part. And when I got back to the dressing room, he was just livid. He was throwing things, that seemed well heavier than any human being should be able to throw, just like flipping tables and furniture, and especially, screaming at me. And it was it's like having your dad yell at you, but much worse, because I never actually set my dad on fire. So my father never had that kind of reason to do that. And then, later on, that I guess that next day, I didn't know that Terry came back from the hospital and did promos for the next month. I didn't know where he was. I remember driving home and thinking, I'll never wrestle again. And by the time I got home, it was I'll never wrestle again in this country. Like I'd kind of changed the rules of my own, self-imposed retirement. But the next day, I called his house to make sure that I'd be the first one, whose voice he heard. And then my wife and I went out for the day, and we came home. He had left a message. I remember it almost, verbatim, where he said, "Cactus Jack, this is Terry Funk, and I acted like a damn fool last night. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. But I'll tell you what, we sure gave him a lot to talk about in Japan." And so it was, it really, made my day, because that was a terrible, terrible occurrence. And then we were almost, we were sued. The Funker and I each spent 6 days in Philadelphia in court, and we were very, very lucky to come out of there, without paying a dime.
Anything else, Jeff?
No, thanks a lot, guys.
Okay, very welcome. We're going to go to Prospect, Connecticut. Jeff. Also, Jeff, what's going on?
Hey, Mick, it's a pleasure talking to you. You're among my favorites of all time.
Well, thank you.
My first question, I just had a couple questions. My first question is kind of like the last one Dave asked, but the opposite. Who would you say off the top of your head is among the worst workers you ever had to work with in-ring talent-wise?
Oh, man, that's where I win a lot of friends. Mil Mascara stands.
I knew that was coming.
What about like a guy like an El Gigante?
El Gigante, yeah, he was kind of awkward, but I only had a couple of matches with him. But Mascara stands out because he was so famous, and because almost universally people hated working with him, and they thought he was, a real selfish worker. But he managed to stay over. He's standing out in my mind, and I don't know. Probably that's something I'd have to think about for a while. But I'll go with Mascaras as the worst, most overrated, most selfish guy I've ever worked with.
You know what's funny about him is that everyone that you talk with that spent a lot of time around Mil Mascaras has like the kind of like the Mil Mascaras comedy about staying on tippy toes, sucking in his stomach, and all that. And just the impossibility of trying to work with him because he wouldn't give anyone anything.
Right.
Yet at the same time, out of all of the wrestlers that ever wrestled, all the Mexican wrestlers in history, on a worldwide basis, nobody ever clicked like he did.
I know.
I mean, everywhere he went, from New York to Japan. There were wrestlers as big in Mexico, but when they got out of Mexico, none of them meant anything.
Yeah, and that's something I can't explain, because you'd think that a guy would have to have, he obviously had talent, but you'd think that, having good matches and being unselfish would be part of would be part of the whole package. But for him, it wasn't. And I don't know how he got to be that famous, but I just know that everybody who worked with him hated it.
My second question was, what happens when you're going into a match, like you're in a match with like a Mil Mascaras, or even like maybe a few of your matches with The Undertaker, and you're realizing that this match is just like so horrible and there's nothing you could possibly do to make it any better? What do you do in a situation like that?
Oh man, you know what? I used to fight it. I used to think I could do salvage almost anything. And the one that sticks out in my mind is the one I just kind of gave up on, was that tag team match that just seemed to go on forever with me and Sullivan against, I can't remember offhand who it was, but it was my last pay-per-view. Not my last one, it was like the one where I had the bad back, July of 94, I think. It was Roma and Orndorff? I can't remember.
I don't remember the match.
I think so. Pretty wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, Pretty Wonderful. It just went on forever, and I was really fearing for my health, and I wasn't really supposed to be out there, and I think I said in my book that I was on the ring apron thinking I can save it, and then I just kind of waited until that feeling went away, and that was the one time I remember the match just being dreadful and not really caring. There were other times I did try. I mean, there was the Nikolai Volkov match, where, obviously I couldn't solve that riddle on how to have a good match out of Nikolai. I've been in my share of stinkers, believe me, and some of them, you look back on and you just kind of laugh. There was one where, Kerry Von Erich had a new girlfriend in the front row and was just trying his best to impress her at, it meant, participating in, one of the worst matches of all time.
My last question, really quick. What do you remember about the match you had in WCW and the electric chair match at Halloween Havoc?
Oh, I was just reminiscing about it with a fan in England because they had the videotape. You know what? It didn't strike me that we were having that bad of a match at the time. There was so much going on. I think if you looked at it, it really wasn't that bad. It was just that the premise was kind of ridiculous. And when the on-off switch to the electric chair was on and nothing happened, and I think, at one point we had to pretend that it hadn't stopped working. It was a big mess, but I think Abdullah's performance in the chair.
Well, that made it memorable.
Yeah, it was what everyone remembers. He was really selling it. But it was, I've had a lot of really, really bad matches, but I don't consider that one to be in that league.
I want to ask you, Mick, you're kind of in an interesting, traveling in kind of literary worlds right now, but as a wrestler, is there anything that stands out in your mind, whether it be a media piece on you or say a reporter that you've dealt with on a radio show or something, where you just, it was one of those things where no matter what you did, you realized you were doomed because you were a wrestler? And, any more than others, or not, never?
I didn't necessarily get that feeling, when I was doing it. Like, for example, the second 2020 piece.
That's funny. That was exactly what I was going to bring up next.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea that they were going to go with that really, kind of, depressing angle. Because I didn't think of the end of my career as being depressing. I thought of it as being, kind of a happy time, especially when I got like the second lease on life, unfortunately due to Austin's injury, and was able to go out, with a couple of big matches on top. But that was, one thing where they just, were going to, they had their story in mind, I think. And I think that's what a lot of journalists do. I didn't see the piece, on Real Sports, but and I wanted to see it, but I just wasn't in a place that got home box office at the time. But from what I was told, they just kept asking Vince that question over and over, and I think they knew based on, his performance on Costas that he would react aggressively to it. And it's like, how many times can you answer the same question before it gets annoying? And I think, there are a lot of journalists that do that. They make up their story, and then they just set about finding the quotes that will back it up. And, obviously, if you talk to somebody for 4 hours and then they end up taking, three quotes from you, they're going to get what they want. And that's unfortunately the case. But I don't remember thinking, well, there was one time, and of all things, it was my local newspaper. And it was a book signing in Stony Brook, New York, where I grew up, and I thought, okay, well, this obviously is just, local kid does, writes a book, and the woman just started lobbing all these accusations out at me, and I felt strong enough to write a pretty vehement letter to the editor, and apparently that, among other things, cost her job, because I did point out, how little, research she did, and how, she
Mick.
said about. Oh, sorry, Dave.
We got to go.
All right.
I want to thank you very much. We'll see you all next week.
Sounds good.